Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Emmy Nixon. Today, we are continuing our NFL preview series for 2023. Make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel as we continue all the way up to our number one team in the NFL going into this season. Today, we're going to be doing 12 through 9. It's going to be part 3 of this series. Make sure to go check out 20 through 13 up to this point if you haven't already. But joining me from Houston, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. How you doing?
Have a new hat, as everyone can see. Aaron Judge decided to hit 3 home runs tonight, which is a refreshing sight if you're Yankees fans who, team has been rough lately, to say the least. There are documentaries out that I've, been really into, a couple of which have to do with college football. And like Emmy said, go check out all our content, including deep in the heart of Longhorn sports, or what we are calling Dit Hole. I will be live. It might change a couple weeks during the football season, depending on what games are on Monday night and what games are on Thursday night. Like if my Steelers are playing on a Monday night, which they do in week 2, I might not actually be going live that night. I might have to push it to Tuesday. But for the most part, I'll be live Monday and Thursday nights all the way through the football season, talking mostly Longhorns and some other things going on around college sports. So make sure you tune into that. Did a great episode that's gotten rave reviews so far on Monday, where I talked about the defense. Tomorrow, I will be talking about the Texas offense, along with some basketball. What's going on with Rodney Terry this offseason? I'm sure a lot of people are wondering. So be talking about that. Make sure you guys tune in. Give us your feedback as well. But let's waste no more time. Let's jump right back into these rankings in our NFL preview. It's been a while since we've done one of these, it feels like. So our number 12 team in these rankings, the Seattle Seahawks, who went 9-8 last year. They lost in the wild card round to San Francisco. Had a +6 point differential, went 4-6 in one-score games, a 40% winning percentage. They went 3-1 though in games decided by a field goal or less. They had some impressive wins, including a 2-touchdown victory over the Los Angeles Chargers, who were another playoff team themselves, on the road in Week 7. And they won a key divisional game in Week 18, beating the Los Angeles Rams by a score of 19-16, a game that if they had lost, probably wouldn't have been in the playoffs last year. And for a half there in that San Francisco game, they gave San Francisco some trouble. But they ended up losing that game. Geno Smith had a fantastic season. A season which I don't think a lot of people expected the Seahawks to do what they did. And so you got to give Pete Carroll credit, the whole coaching staff. That's the 2022 recap side of things. Let's jump right into our 3 favorite offseason moves for the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, we're just gonna go run through our top 3 for these. So for my number 3, I went with the center they picked up from the Detroit Lions, Evan Brown. He's a maul in the run game, but struggles a bit in pass protection, but overall is a upgrade at that center spot. And with some of the questions they have at guard, having a good center in there is going to really help solidify the interior of that offensive line, especially in the run game. In the pass game, some things with play strength. He lost a lot of reps here and there with that, but in the run game, it's really going to show itself, and they're going to really be leaning into Kenneth Walker this year. So in the run game, that's really going to pay dividends for them.
Absolutely. They solidified their tackle spots last year with Abraham Lucas and the other kid. Who's the other tackle?
Charles Cross.
Charles Cross, that's right, from Mississippi State. Uh, they needed to work on that interior of the offensive line. They went out and addressed that. I think it's an upgrade at that center position. Position they've really been looking to solidify now for a couple of years. So give credit to them where credit is due. Doing that, it should help the running game. They have a stable of very, very good running backs that I would characterize that room. They just drafted another one in this past year's draft, Zach Charbonnet from UCLA, along with Kenneth Walker, DJ Dallas. The list goes on and on. We'll see who actually makes the depth chart, but that's absolutely a good move. It's one that I considered. These aren't really, I mean, they're technically in order, but not like you could switch things around and I wouldn't argue with you. I have Devin Witherspoon as my number 3 favorite. Look, one of the best players in the draft, best pure corner in the draft. And you put him in the Seattle secondary. I think it's going to fit really, really well. There's a little bit of a scheme difference between what he was playing at Illinois and what he's going to play in Seattle, but I think he'll adjust just fine. And as long as he's healthy, I don't know if he's fully recovered from whatever he was dealing with in camp, but he should be fine, ready to go for the regular season. I think he's going to end up being a Pro Bowl caliber player. I think he's that good. So Devin Witherspoon was my number 3. And then my number 2, as we'll kind of snake this thing, was Jackson Smith-Njigba, who actually just got wrist surgery and is going to be out 3 to 4 weeks. But they needed a number 3 receiver, and they got that. He's got the versatility to play in the slot. We all remember the Rose Bowl game where he had, I think it was 14 catches for 357 yards, and I think it was 3 or 4 touchdowns. Absolute weapon that they're going to use and use big. He's going to stretch the field for them. He can run a variety of different routes, and you just put him next to Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf in that receiver room, and Seattle all of a sudden has one of the top receiving cores in the NFL. Like, I don't know where I would rank them, but they're in the top half for sure. So I think they've nailed the draft 2 years in a row. It's something that they were struggling to do before that in the Russell Wilson era. But they've absolutely nailed the draft 2 years in a row. I think both players are going to end up being really, really good players, solidified starters for the Seahawks. And it's scary if they continue to draft this well around Geno Smith.
Yeah, I had Devon Witherspoon at number. I just think no matter how you shake it up, he has to be on your list just because whether you want to play him at nickel, slot, a little bit of safety, even he can play in the box. The one thing I like about Devon Witherspoon the most is he's just a dog. When he makes a play, he's going to let you know about it. He's going to talk trash. He's going to talk his stuff, and he's going to back it up. And I feel like that's a trait that you have to have in the league because, especially as a defensive back, your confidence is your greatest weapon. Like you can have all the physical traits in the world, but if you're not confident, you're not going to survive.
Who's your number 1?
My number 1 was Jackson Smith-Njigba. I just think. Oh, sorry, no. My number 1 was Tremont Jones from they picked up from Denver to be a interior defensive lineman. I just thought it was such a big need for them last year, and going out and picking up a 26-year-old in his prime, who's going to be able to rush the passer a lot better than what they were able to get last year from their interior defensive linemen, and also hold up in the run game a bit here and there as well. And overall, I just think for Seattle to get to where they want to go, they have to get the most out of that defensive line, that front seven. And we're going to get into that later. But I think Draymond Jones was a huge need and a huge pickup for this defense.
Great minds think alike, and I had Draymond Jones as my number one acquisition as well. He got the largest contract that Seattle has ever given an external free agent in the Pete Carroll era. 3 years, 51 million plus dollars. I think he's going to be a real difference maker on that interior defensive line for the Seahawks. They also brought back Jaron Reed, who I think will help. But Draymond Jones was the big dog. I think he's going to help in pass rush and in run defense. As you mentioned, 26 years old, in the middle of his prime, had a 16% pass rush win rate last year. So he's obviously capable at pushing the pocket from the interior. And he's going to be, I think, one of their better defensive linemen right away. You don't give a guy that type of money who you don't think can be that for you. So Draymond Jones absolutely was a huge addition for Seattle. They had to go out, and it's about time that they, make moves on this defensive front. Draymond Jones, the edge rush position we can talk about maybe a little bit later, but I've seen some good things out of guys like Boye Mafe in preseason. And of course, Uchenna Nwosu, who they picked up last year, has looked good as well. But Draymond Jones, big time pickup for Seattle. And I think their defensive line will be better. How much better? That's yet to be seen. So our next little segment here is the 3 most important players on the roster. I'll let you start us off.
Yeah, I for my most important players, I really had a focus on the lines on both sides of the ball, interior defensive line and offensive line as well. But for my first most important player, I went with Geno Smith. I just thought with everything that happened last year, started off the season fantastically, obviously, and then tapered off towards the end of the season. They finished 3-5 over the last 8 games, and a lot of that had to do with a little bit of a drop off from Geno Smith, and obviously other factors played a part in it. But they're hoping for a lot from Geno Smith this year. There's no question about it, and he's got to deliver for them if they want to be Super Bowl hopefuls, which I think they are. They have one of the highest ceilings in the league, but they also have a low floor because of some of the questions people still have about Geno Smith.
Yeah, he was my first most important player as well. Seattle had the capability to score those kind of cheap touchdowns that you look for in Super Bowl contenders. They were an explosive offense last year. When they scored, it was often from 10 plus yards out. They scored 30 touchdowns on plays of 10 or more yards. That was the most in the National Football League last year. No other team had more than 27 such touchdowns. They also had 29 offensive plays that gained 30 or more yards. That was tied 4th most in the NFL, just behind the 49ers, the Chiefs, and the Eagles, who were all in their respective conference championship games. 2 of those teams made the Super Bowl. So I think, their offense only got better, but how far this team goes obviously depends on whether or not Geno Smith can not only replicate what he did last year, but maybe even get even better. I think he's definitely got the arm talent. I think that's something people underrate about Geno Smith. He's got like an NFL arm for sure. Can make all the throws that you need him to make. I just think with the pieces that they added around him here and there, with an improved interior offensive line, hopefully, uh, in this running game, which I expect to be pretty damn good with the running backs that the stable of backs that they have. I mean, picking up a guy like Kenny McIntosh in the draft to go along with Kenneth Walker and the guy they drafted, Zach Charbonnet, they all kind of complement each other in a way. I think Geno Smith has now all the weapons at his disposal, all the necessary pieces at his disposal, and I expect him to have another really good season. What does that mean for, you know, the team? Well, the NFC's outside of the Eagles right now is I would characterize as pretty wide open. Um, there are questions in San Francisco about the quarterback spot, some of which is being answered right now in training camp, or I guess as we near the end of training camp and start, in the near going into the last week of preseason. But yeah, Geno Smith, absolutely important player. My number two, I'll just run through the rest of them real fast. Bobby Wagner, I think he's a really important player to this team. They brought him back, still a really productive player. Uh, Kind of on the back half of his career, probably in the daylight stages of his career or whatever the term is for that. Um, I think he does a lot in terms of leadership, in terms of you want your middle linebacker to hold your defensive front and the defensive secondary and kind of mush them together. And I think Bobby Wagner does that. He's still a very productive player. And then I have Draymond Jones. Like, this defensive line has to be better. And I think Draymond Jones, as I spoke to, don't really need to elaborate much more, helps them in that area. So there are arguments for other players, absolutely. But those are my top three.
Yeah. For my number three, I had Bobby Wagner on my list also. I think his veteran leadership and also the fact that he still has football in the tank. He still has good football in the tank. There's no question about it. He wasn't dominant by any means for the Rams last year, but that was not a good situation with the Rams. I think everyone would really agree on that. So now going back to a defense that has a lot of talent on it, I just think with him as the signal caller, as a vocal leader, that's going to raise the floor of the defense. And I think he's going to have guys in the right spots, and the communication is going to be more sharp, and they're going to be led better just on the field as a whole. They're just going to be more sharp as a unit.
Yeah, and it's even more important having a guy like Bobby Wagner there because late last season, Jordan Brooks, who was the third-year player out of Texas Tech, pretty solid linebacker for them last year, tore his ACL, and they're still not sure on a timeline on when he could possibly return. So right now, if you don't have a guy like Bobby Wagner, I mean, what are you looking at in terms of the middle linebacker position for Seattle right now? You're looking at Devin Bush, who is still trying to figure it out early on in his career, and whoever else they have. I mean, I'm not ultra familiar with their middle linebacker depth chart, but uh, it's even more important considering they're dealing with an injury to a key guy at that position. Is the point? So we're already gone on for about 17 minutes on the Seahawks. Let's wrap it up by talking about our expectation for this team in 2023. What is their over/under win total?
Their over under is at 9.5, I believe. Let me confirm that.
I think you're correct. I think
8.5.
8.5.
According
Okay.
to Fox, it's 8.5.
Okay. Um, what do you think?
I think I think that's really low. If I'm being completely honest, I think I'd be hard pressed to find a team that um, is more matchup dependent because of how their pass rush is and because of the questions there. But I also think they have a good system and they know who they are as a football team. And when you're in the opening stages of a season, that's half the battle. I mean, a lot of teams go through a lot of roster changes, roster turnover. And when you're a team who already knows their identity and just has the talent that they do, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine their wins being below 9. I think it has to be the over, and I think it could be 10 or 11 here.
I agree with you. I'm betting the over. In fact, I might hammer the over. Uh, Look, I think Seattle's front office had a very successful offseason once again. They improved the team. I would say on both sides of the ball with the pieces that they added. The addition of Jackson Smith and Jigba, the first round wide receiver out of Ohio State, I think allows the offense to play more three wide receiver sets, which we didn't see a whole lot last year from Seattle. And I think that will help both the passing game and the running game, spread it out a little more, have another threat on the field. Um, their defense, which ranked in the bottom 10 in rushing defense DVOA, which is an advanced metric that's used to measure effectiveness against the run as a defense. I think that's going to be improved with the addition of Draymond Jones, bringing back a guy like Jaron Reed. And look, they struggled in a couple areas last year, one of which was the red zone. Um, they scored a touchdown on 48% of their red zone trips last year, just about, which was the sixth worst rate in the league. Um, so, it kind of forced them to score in other ways, and they did an effective job of that. But they need to get better in that area. It's certainly an important thing in football to be really good in the red zone, especially come playoff time. On both sides of the ball, I think the addition of Zach Charbonnet from UCLA, the running back, can help improve a rushing offense that had the third lowest run success rate in the red zone last year. And I think their red zone efficiency overall, with the weapons that they added, the pieces that they added, and hopefully an improved interior offensive line, will improve that overall aspect of this team, which will make them a better team. And I look at their
Yeah.
schedule, and I see a lot of winnable games early on. There's no games on here that, I mean, they start off the season at home with the Rams. They go at Detroit. That's a tough one. Back home for Carolina, facing a rookie quarterback. We all know how tough it is to play in Seattle. But there's nothing Bryce Young hasn't seen playing in the SEC. So who knows? Um, their schedule is kind of backloaded. I mean, they get San Francisco twice, Dallas, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Tennessee, all in the month of November and December in a span of like 6 weeks. So that scares me a little bit, but I think by that time they're already going to be around 7 or 8 wins. Just looking at how their schedule sets up early on, and I think with all the improvements that they made to the roster, and how much we doubted uh, both Geno Smith and the decisions by the Seattle front offense going back to last year, I'm not going to do that again. So I do think they'll be right up there with San Francisco, in fact. maybe even competing for the NFC West division title. We'll see.
One other thing I want to say is another reason why I'm so confident in this team, why we're both so confident in this team, is they are deep. Um, Adding a guy like Devin Bush to be a backup linebacker for you, Jordan Brooks still getting better. They still have, young guys that have shown that can be, viable options in the NFL. Stone Forsythe is a guy I want to shout out. He's someone who's probably one of the best swing six man type tackles in the NFL. Having him as a backup is a luxury. I mean, you look all over the field. I mean, even Noah Fant, he's going to be a possibly a fourth option on this team. On other teams, he's a first, second option.
Yeah. We both really like the Seahawks. I really like this next team. I suspect I might be a little higher than Emmy is on this next team, or maybe just higher than a lot of people are. But that would be the Jacksonville Jaguars. Can you recap what the Jacksonville Jaguars did in 2022?
Yeah, the Jacksonville Jaguars went 9-8 last year. They went 5-3 at home, 4-5 on the road, and overall had a plus 54 point differential. So really good. Had a lot of quality wins, blowing out teams, um, and really took a huge step forward thanks to one great play calling and the huge jump that we saw from Trevor Lawrence. That he showed off that amazing talent that he has to make those big time throws inside, outside the pocket, making plays with his legs, and that to me just really raised the ceiling of this team to where they got all the way to the divisional round and ultimately had one of the craziest comebacks in playoff history in the wild card game against the Chargers.
Yeah, boy, was that a crazy game. Every time I think about the Jacksonville Jaguars, that's like the first thing that pops into my head from last year. Um, the thing that really, I think, elevated this team last year was Doug Peterson. I mean, obviously Lawrence had a great season, but I don't know that without Doug Peterson there, uh, a lot of people questioned the hire. I didn't particularly absolutely love it. I liked it, but I did not expect the things to come out of it as good as it did, and it did. So they actually had a fairly quiet offseason for a team that had a lot of success last year, got to the divisional round, and actually was in the game with Kansas City uh, for a while there. Um, we all know what happened to Mahomes, but I mean that speaks for itself. On the road, a young team like Jacksonville. Um, they didn't do a whole lot this offseason. Not a whole lot of high profile moves. So I kind of cheated a little bit in our offseason acquisitions. Uh, and I'm interested to hear what yours are. But my first one is bringing back Evan Ingram, the tight end that they re signed to, I believe, a multi year contract. I'm not exactly sure how much he got, but I believe in and they drafted a tight end as well. But in the last half of last year, Evan Ingram only trailed Travis Kelce in touchdowns and catches for first downs. When you put those numbers together and you combine them, nobody was better outside of Travis Kelce than Evan Ingram was last year. He really got involved in the offense. And I think with the things that they add around him this year, which we might speak about here in a couple minutes, uh, I expect Evan Ingram to play a big role in this offense with what I saw at the end of last season.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. My number three was Anton Harrison, their first round pick. I'm not sure how good he's going to be in year one. There was questions about his pass protection technique, but I really love the upside of that pick, and I just love the process that they took to make that pick. Getting younger at that position, getting cheaper, I think is going to pay dividends in the long run. Obviously, with in the early stages of having to give Trevor Lawrence a huge contract in the future, most likely having to re-sign a bunch of guys, as all teams have to do. So, Anton Harrison, my number 3. My number
Mine,
2.
oh, yeah, go ahead.
Um, Yeah, this is where it gets kind of dicey. um, I honestly just I didn't know what to do for to make a list of 3, but I'm gonna just go ahead and say uh, Evan Ingram as well. I think, I mean, at tight end and everything you had just mentioned, I wasn't really sure how to make a list of 3, but it was pretty obvious who the number 1 is, and that number 1 is what is raising the ceiling so much for this team in a lot of people's eyes, of course.
Yeah, my number 2, I struggled. I mean, you're not the only one who struggled with this exercise and doing prep for this episode. I went with Tank Bigsby, the running back that they drafted out of Auburn, and I think it was the third or fourth round. Um, Look, I mean, with and they also brought in another running back, Dearness Johnson, uh, in free agency as sort of a smaller depth type move. But I really like Tank Bigsby. I think he'll complement Travis Etienne really well. He's going to give the Jaguars sort of a short yardage power back um, that I think, the Jaguars sort of lacked in a way last year. I think he'll complement Travis Etienne really well and give them some necessary depth at the running back spot. I believe they traded away James Robinson or he left in free agency. I'm not exactly sure. So they needed a guy in the backfield. And I think Tank Bigsby, with how much he produced at Auburn in the SEC, I think he's going to be a good player in the NFL. And then my number 1, I think we'll both agree, is Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
He raises the ceiling of this offense exponentially. Now, he has not played a whole lot of football in the past couple of years, and that's what I think some are concerned about. But I think he complements what they have in Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Evan Ingram. Uh, he's one of the, when we last saw him play, one of the NFL's fastest and most versatile wide receivers. I think he's going to emerge as the wide receiver 1 for this team eventually if he's fully healthy. And, you know, with the variety of things that he can do, stretching the field with his speed, uh, I think that's why it's a big reason why people are high on what this Jacksonville team, especially this Jacksonville offense, will be able to do in year 2 under Doug Peterson, who's a fantastic, brilliant offensive mind. So those are my 3. It was hard to come up with a list, but I like the depth move at running back, getting a guy like Tank Bigsby. I think he'll be a solid player, sort of an overlooked player in what was a pretty good running back class. And then Calvin Ridley and bringing back Evan Ingram. All moves, weirdly, on the offensive side of the ball. But, hey, I mean, that's going to be – it's one of the reasons why people are so high on this team.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think the offensive side of the ball, I think that they have amazingly high ceiling. I think this Jacksonville team, even though I was a little bit lower on them in terms of these rankings, the more I've researched them, the more I've looked into their team, there's like a couple questions here and there, but based on what their schedule is, they have a outside chance of having the AFC come to Jacksonville. And that's saying a lot with how many great teams are in the AFC. But they have a legitimate shot at getting out and getting an amazing regular season record.
Absolutely, they do. Let's talk about the most important Jaguars. Who are the keystone players on this Jacksonville team? I'll start us off, and this for some people who aren't deep in the depths of NFL rosters like we are here on the Raw Prospect Podcast, it might kind of fly over people's heads as okay, whatever. But I think Tyson Campbell, the second year corner, I think he is. Yeah, the second year corner out of Georgia. I think by the end of this season, you could hear his name as start to be mentioned amongst the national pundits, amongst the national media as one of the better corners in the National Football League. Like he's going to be the guy in the secondary for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Really productive, or showed flashes last year. I think Tyson Campbell is, if not, he might not be one of the better players on this Jacksonville team right now, but I think he's definitely one of the most important. Like, I don't know that I fully am enthralled with what they have in their secondary if Tyson Campbell were to go down with some kind of injury early on. I think he's very important to what they're doing defensively.
Yeah, definitely. I had Tyson Campbell at number 3 as well. I think, to your point, if he goes down, he's really their main guy at corner that they're gonna have shadowing the other team's best receiver. And without him, you have Darius Williams, who's I think 5'9", 5'10", and as solid as he's been in his NFL career, it's just limited on how good he can be as a corner because of his lack of size and length. So Campbell provides that, and he's just so incredibly important to that team.
Yeah, who's your number 2?
My number 2 is going to be Walker Little. They have Cam Robinson suspended for the first, I think it was 4 to 6 games of the season. I don't have the exact number on that, but Walker Little is a guy they drafted out of Stanford a couple of years ago and has played snaps here and there, but throwing him in at left tackle, he's gonna be really important to keep Trevor Lawrence on his feet for the first few weeks of the season and getting off to a good start in the season. If their offensive line is really struggling, especially with Anton Harrison, a rookie, on the other side, then things might get a little dicey there.
Yeah. The tackle position right now for the Jacksonville Jaguars on both sides is a little dicey, especially to start the season. And so I can see where you're coming from there, absolutely. For me, I kind of went back and forth for my number 2. There are 2 players defensively that I think both need to have better seasons than they did a year ago for this Jacksonville defense to really reach its full potential, whatever that might be. But I went with Josh Allen, not the quarterback, the pass rusher. Uh, he's going into his 5th year. This is his 5th year option season. For a unit that ranked 20 tied 25th in the NFL in sacks last season. They need a guy who is going to be a disruptor off the edge. We've seen flashes from Josh Allen. It's not to say that he's been a bad player, but I think he is. We need to see a more consistent version of him. And I think you can make the argument along with Trayvon Walker that he's like the key to unlocking the potential of this defense. Like they have to be able to create pressure on the quarterback and get to the quarterback. They need that disruptor because I still have questions about what they have in the secondary outside of Tyson Campbell, like we already mentioned. And so if you're not putting pressure on the quarterback, that then puts a lot of stress on your secondary. It still could be a good secondary, but there are some questions. So I think Josh Allen is extremely important, not only to this defense, but to the team's success. Like, especially when you get to the playoffs, you got to have a guy who is going to get after the quarterback that you can rely upon consistently. Whether that's Trayvon Walker or Josh Allen or whoever it might be, they need that guy. And I'm looking at Josh Allen because it's kind of that time where he's got to show it. It's now or never. So,
Yeah,
um, or at least with Jacksonville.
yeah,
So,
definitely. And for my number one, I went with Trayvon Walker. Josh Allen, I think, as you said, big season for him individually, absolutely trying to earn that big contract. But I think for Jacksonville, they're hoping he can replicate what he did last year, but they got to get more out of Trayvon Walker going into year two. He was their number one overall pick, and anytime you have a high investment into a player, high amount of value put into a guy, they got to deliver, or else you just it's that opportunity cost that's just going to eat at your franchise. And I'm not saying he was awful last year. He was good in the run game, defending. He wasn't that great rushing the passer, and that dynamic athleticism is the reason why they were drafting him. The reason why they drafted him at number one. So really looking at him, and the pressure is going to be on. This team is ready to win, and in order for them, in order for this defense to be any sort of decent, like he's got to deliver because I have questions about this secondary.
yeah, absolutely. Look, everyone knows that Trevor Lawrence is of the utmost importance, but for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to go with Trayvon Walker as well. He's got to be better. Not that he wasn't good last year, as you mentioned. Still at 3.5 sacks, but for a guy that was the number one pick, um, him and Josh Allen sort of as a duo with Walker playing on the interior and Josh Allen on the edge, wherever they line up Walker, he's just got to do more. The lack of pass rush last year for Jacksonville was one of the reasons that number one, they struggled to get off the field on third down. And number two, uh, they were, I think, ranked 28th in the league in pass yards allowed. If you're not putting pressure on the opposing quarterback in the AFC, you're in trouble defensively. It's going to make it all that much harder to match up with a lot of these teams. The Bengals, the Chiefs, the Dolphins, the Ravens even look like they have a really good stable of wide receivers. Even the teams that are sort of the teams that we think are borderline playoff teams have a ton of weapons. So you got to be able to create pressure on the quarterback, and that's going to help you create turnovers and do all the things that you want to do defensively. It's going to make your secondary look a lot better than it probably is. Um, and so, yeah, it'd be easy to say Trevor Lawrence. He's obviously like that's implied, but Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen are guys that I'm going to be watching very closely when I watch Jacksonville this year. And I'm going to be watching them a lot because despite everything that we've mentioned that we're sort of concerned about, I'm still really high on this team. And that's where we get into our projection. Now, what I think we might want to do before we get into this projection is split part three into two episodes like we did last time since we're already at the 45-minute mark.
Oh
Um,
my goodness, we are.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll probably end up doing that. We'll end it after we give our projection for Jacksonville, and then we'll come back with part two uh, with number 10 and number 9 in our countdown as we start to count down the top 10. What is the over under for Jacksonville? Is it
They're
9?
over under.
I think I saw 9.5, but I could be
Let's
wrong.
see. 9.5. Yes.
9.5. What do you think?
I think I'm lower on this team than you are, and I think this team is a bit more on the Seattle range for me because they have a really high ceiling and a low floor. But I think their floor is right around 9 or 10. I don't think they'll get anywhere below that because of how their schedule is. So I'm just gonna say the over. I think realistically, 10 or 11 wins. I think that's the range that they'll be at. I think it's gonna be a lot on that offense. I think at best, this defense will be, 15th to 12th best in the league. At worst, if you get a few injuries at key spots, it could get much lower than that. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Hold on. Am I looking at this correctly? Do they play 2 games in London this year? Or is that like typo?
They're foreshadowing something for sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, I look at their schedule. Kansas City, week 2. That'll be a fun one. Rematch of the playoff game. But out and in Buffalo a couple weeks later. I mean, it's not easy. At New Orleans, at Pittsburgh, before they get into a bye. The good thing is the bye comes about halfway through the season. Uh, it's a pretty balanced schedule now that I'm looking at it. Um, but look, I think I can't, be as high as I've been and then all of a sudden go the under route. I think this team is still going to be a 10 or 11 win team. I think their ceiling is pretty high. I could see a scenario where they win 12 or 13 games in the regular season and end up in the conversation for the number 1 seed. I could absolutely see it happen with, now what they have offensively with Trevor Lawrence, Doug Peterson. I think they're due for some positive regression in a couple areas. Number one, they were 4-6 in one-score games last year. I think they're likely to see improved fumble luck, improved field goal luck. They actually brought in Brandon McManus, which I really like. Um, I think Trevor Lawrence, of course, he took a gigantic step forward last year. Completion percentage increased by 6.5%. His interception rate dropped by 50%, and his touchdown rate more than doubled. They add Calvin Ridley. They bring back, Evan Ingram. They still have Christian Kirk, who was a 1,000-yard receiver last year, along with Zay Jones. I just think they have too much talent offensively, and Trevor Lawrence is too good of a quarterback in this division, where I think they have an automatic 5 or 6 wins. Now I got to be careful saying that. You never know what can happen on any given Sunday, but they're better than the teams that are in their division, so they should win those games. I think it'll be relatively easy for them to find a way to 10 wins. So I'll take the over.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to not take the over on a lot of these teams. Once you get into the top 10 teams in the NFL, you get into those 9.5 numbers. I mean, I feel like the Jaguars would really have to underachieve to win only 9 games.
Right.
So we'll see what happens, but it's interesting to see that Vegas has that line at where it's at.
Right.
Okay. Um, well, that's going to do it for this episode. We're going to split it up into two parts, just like last time. Um, we hope you enjoyed that. We had a lot of fun recording that, but stay tuned for part 2 where we reveal number 10 and number 9.
It's kind of perfect because there's a little bit of suspense now between the first 10 and the next 10. And the top 10 is really what a lot of people want to know. So we'll see you in a little bit for part 2. I'm not going to do my official um, outro yet because this episode technically isn't over. So we'll see you on the other
We'll
side.
see you for part two.
Yep.